Assalamualaikum everyone, welcome to the fourth session of the Nature series hosted by the British Council in collaboration with the Dawood Foundation. Thank you for joining us today for a very important and hopefully informative session. If you haven't been able to join us for our previous sessions, the recordings are available on our Facebook and YouTube pages, so you can take a look there. This session will also be recorded and will be posted on our social media pages. Before we start, we would like to request all participants to keep their mics and cameras off. This is just to make sure that the internet speed remains okay throughout the session and you're able to see and hear the panelists clearly throughout. I'm going to hand over to Aisha, who will be the moderator for this session and who will introduce our panelists and begin. Thank you.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum and welcome everyone to the fourth and last session of our four-part series. This has been organized by the British Council and the Dawood Foundation. Before I introduce our panelists, I would just like to say that I would really appreciate if the audience would participate. Any and all questions that are posted on the chat group, I will also address. Moving on, today we welcome our esteemed panelist, Mr. Rafay Alam, who is an environmental lawyer and activist. He is the co-founder of Saleem, Alam & Co., a law firm that specializes in energy, water, natural resources, and urban infrastructure. Rafay is also the Vice President, Punjab, of the Pakistan Environmental Law Association and the General Secretary of the Public Interest Law Association of Pakistan. Then we have Mr. Saqib Ijaz Hussain, who is an environmental and social safeguard specialist who has practiced environmental planning, assessment, and compliance for the last 13 years. He is the CEO of EHS Services, one of the country's emerging environmental consultancies. He is also a director at Sustainable Waste Management Company. He has also published his work on ecology and biodiversity in different journals of repute and has earned a postgraduate degree in applied chemistry. Lastly, we come to Dr. Kulsoom Ahmed, who is an senior advisor and author on international development, climate change, and environmental sustainability. She is a former global practice manager of the World Bank. With over 25 years experience in international development and public policy analysis, Dr. Ahmed is currently an honorary fellow of the Consortium for Development Policy Research in Pakistan. Thank you everyone for joining us. So today our topic of discussion is pollution, and I think it's the most important one because I think we need to change our practices as Pakistanis more than anyone when it comes to pollution. So before we go on, I have a few facts on the topic that I would like to share. Firstly, 2019 concluded a decade of exceptional global heat, retreating ice and record sea levels driven by greenhouse gases produced by human activities. It was also the second hottest year on record. According to Pakistan's National Action Plan, the most significant causes of environmental damage identified and estimated are illness and premature mortality caused by air pollution, indoor and outdoor. In addition to this, the harm from Pakistan's urban air pollution is among the highest in South Asia. Due to air pollution, about 575,000 Pakistanis are exposed to lead contamination from a range of industries, mostly in Punjab and Sindh. Fourthly, 15,000 children suffer exposure levels sufficient to lead to loss of intellectual function. According to a report by World Bank, waterborne diseases in Pakistan are estimated to be the primary cause of death of about 40,000 people annually. And lastly, according to the UN Environment Program, a report by them, it said that Karachi generates over 13,500 tons of solid waste every day. Much of this waste is burned or dumped in open air landfills, creating a serious risk to the environment as well as public health. So the situation right now is quite unsettling and very serious. My first question is to Mr. Rafay Alam. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to direct questions to one person, but after that, the rest of the panelists can always comment or also give their input. So we know that one of the leading causes of air and water pollution is industrialization. For us, is it worth accepting some degree of pollution in return for industry and jobs?
I'm sorry, are you saying that people's lives are less important than industry and jobs? I don't think that's an acceptable proposition. I don't think anywhere in the world societies or people should accept that their rights can be trampled over in the name of something called development. We have fundamental rights to life, not to business and industry and pollution. In my understanding of how, well, let me put it this way. A lot of Pakistanis think that this country can approach environmental and climate issues once it's developed, once it's rich enough to be able to focus on these sorts of things. And when you mentioned the success of other countries in the global north, they'll say, well, these are countries and they can afford to make these sorts of choices. But you have to understand that in these so-called rich countries, the environmental movements that grew weren't sort of on a trajectory of development. They were results of civil society and large-scale opposition by people of the ruthless devastation of ecosystem, environment, and loss of life and property by those few industries and capitalists who were in charge of the economy. They were civil society movements that said it's unacceptable to trade public health for profits. And then the laws were changed. Sometimes in these countries, we think that they have this magic pill. No. These rights have to be fought for. And they can't be forgotten. They can't be forgotten at the altar of development. I don't think.
Yes, Dr. Gusum, go on.
Yeah, I'd like to come in at this point. I actually think to me, the analogy is a bit like cell phones and phones. I don't know whether you remember the time when we had landlines in Pakistan and we had to wait for years, sometimes years to get a landline. It seems inconceivable now. I mean, everybody has cell phones, and actually, I think more people have cell phones than landlines. And Pakistan probably has more cell phones than in a lot of other countries. So I'd like to think of it that way, because the world is moving in a different direction. It's moving to a direction where people are moving to kind of more sustainable industries and more sustainable, environmentally sustainable, greener, cleaner industries and jobs. So I'd like to see Pakistan make that same shift that it did with cell phones, and shift to greener, cleaner jobs. If Pakistan did that, I think we'd actually have more jobs. That's the good thing, because the whole world is facing these issues. It's not just Pakistan, and people are becoming more aware. So even consumers are becoming more aware, which means that the products that these industries produce, if they produce them in a greener, cleaner way, there'll be a bigger market for them than just domestically. So I certainly don't think it's either industry or jobs. I actually think moving to cleaner jobs actually means, better quality jobs, and actually, I think more growth for the country. And we're seeing a lot of countries move in this direction.
What laws can be made or implemented to counter the harmful effects of industrialization? What you speak of when you say cleaner and greener practices and cleaner and greener jobs, I think that if policy would also be a part of this, because industries would also implement those policies, and then it would be greener.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. there are actually a couple of tools which, I mean, there are lots of tools, but let's just start with the two basic tools which most countries employ. And Pakistan actually has both of them. The first is standards. You put environmental standards in place. And then the second thing is you have a system whereby when there are new projects, there are environmental impact assessments. Now, Pakistan has both of these tools. The question is whether they're being used that way. So, for example, standards are not just environmental standards put in just for the sake of it. They're standards based on how pollution is impacting health. So for example, you would expect Lahore, which does have air pollution, to have a totally different standard to somewhere in the middle of Punjab, rural Punjab, where there may not be much industry or transport or whatever, for particulate matter, PM 2.5, which affects health. But that's not the case in Pakistan. We've kind of got these generalized standards, and it's kind of more bureaucratic, I think, rather than actually used for the purpose of thinking, are we putting the standard in order to safeguard health of citizens? And then the EIA is actually a mechanism by which you can actually assess the impact. What does EIA stand for? Environmental Impact Assessment. It's to assess the impact of whatever is being put in place, the project, on the environment. And the environment is the physical environment, but also human beings, because ultimately it's human health that one is trying to do something about. Saqib may have more on this because he's the expert rather than me. So let me pass it on to him.
Yes, please. Hello, Saqib, can you hear us? Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. If I understand your question is it is worth accepting or necessary to accept some degree of pollution in return for industry and jobs? Okay.
Yes.
I think I will totally I'll totally agree with Rafay that I'm also of the same opinion that environment and development must go hand in hand. And there's no compromise when it comes to the human health or the people, because it's a matter of right to life. Rafay better knows, and we all should know that the right to life is enshrined in Article 9 of the Constitution of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, that no person shall be deprived of life. Every Pakistani has the right to live, and this means that nobody, including the government, can try to end your life. If you are going to develop, it's your right, it's the right of the industry to to implement environmental protection measures, because we are already lacking in social infrastructure. We don't have social infrastructure available in the country. If you ask me how many Pakistani children die of diarrhea caused by contaminated water, we already know that the figures given by the United Nations Children's Funds. We already know the fatalities. It's very high. World Bank already gave the different figures about the water pollution, which costs more than 4% of GDP, or nearly around $12 billion a year. According to the typhoid cases and the other hepatitis and other diseases, it is increasing in Pakistan. So the government is constitutionally obligated to take appropriate measures to safeguard the life. If the government doesn't take that appropriate measure to safeguard life, then who will? The question is, out of the major developing countries in the world, which country has the worst newborn mortality rate? Is Pakistan. If we see our health budget, if we see our health infrastructure, we are worst if we compare with the other industries. So there is no compromise. And the right to life and the right to the clean air, right to the clean water, right to the clean environment is the fundamental right of every citizen, and there is no compromise.
Definitely. So I mean, what I'm gathering here is that we have the laws and we have the tools, but they're not being implemented. So how do you think, and this is to any one of the panelists, how do you think that we can further implement these laws, and who do you think is responsible for letting all of this happen? Because as you were saying, when it comes to so many, we turn a blind eye to so many deaths and such such adversity. So who do you think is responsible, and what can we do about it?
Maybe I can come in here. I actually think the responsibility is at multiple levels. I think the responsibility is at the federal government level, even though in Pakistan, these functions are actually state level functions for provincial functions. But I think the federal government should be setting an overall minimum or setting a direction as to what where the country should be going. So I think you need that at a broad level. I think that at the provincial level, these laws need to actually be promulgated thinking about people's health and thinking about these issues that the other panelists have talked about and that you've mentioned, and to think as to how you can improve that situation. Because ultimately, if these laws are put in place, the actions are at the level of many people. It's at the level of industry. It's at the level of how we build infrastructure. It's at the level of individual citizens, how we behave. You talked about plastic pollution. Well, that depends on how you and I, or the plastic bags that are used when we pick up our groceries, or it depends on how things are packaged by industry. So there's not just only the production of things and the pollution that comes from a particular factory, but there's even behavior. And then you talked about industry, but domestic sewage, for example, I find it interesting that I was looking at some data too, and 36% of Pakistanis have access to a safely managed drinking water source. This is according to official government data 2015. But there's 55% piped water coverage. So it's telling you that probably there's sewage and drinking water mixing too. So there's that happening. Transport is also causing pollution, air pollution. So that may mean that we have to think about how we change the quality of the fuels we use, both for cars and transport, but also for industry and for power and so on. So everybody has to intervene at different levels, and people like Rafay have to be active, and people like Saqib have to ensure that EIAs are done properly and that people's opinions are taken into account. So it's kind of every level of society. I think that's the only way I've seen change happen in countries, and I have seen countries completely change from being incredibly polluted to being not even showing up on some of these lists of pollution that we see at the moment.
So thank you, Dr. Kusum. So we have a few questions from the audience. One is there always an increase in pollution with an increase in economic growth? And if so, which ratio is acceptable? Rafay, I think you're muted.
Yeah. Does somebody else want to come in? Otherwise, I can come in on that.
Can I respond?
Yes, please.
Okay. The question is really very important. We have to understand that the sustainable development has three principles. Okay. One is environment, one is economic growth or economy, and the third one is the social values. For a development or acceptable development, there should be a balance between among all these three pillars. If there's no balance between the social values and the environment, there's no sustainable development. So when we see our policies, we are very good in making the policies, but when we see the implementation, at the implementation level, we usually fail. Why? Because when we plan, when we make the policies, we ignore the social factor, which is the most important while assessing the impacts of any development activity. So what happens that there's a complete misbalance among the three pillars of sustainable development, and the result is before us what we are experiencing in Pakistan. So for an acceptable development, for an economically viable development, it should be a sustainable development where all the three pillars, environment, social values, and the economic growth should be there should be a balance among all these.
Okay, Rafay, you had to say something?
Yes, I can't say I'm a big fan of the balancing development.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Not a big fan of balancing economic development with environmental concerns. Okay. Because the way I see it, over the last 200 years, the forces of capitalism met with patriarchy, consumerism, and a fossil fuel-based economy have brought the Earth to an extinction point. Last year, we recorded 415 parts per million carbon in the atmosphere, a level which this Earth hasn't experienced since 15 million years ago. And for context, human beings have been on this planet 500,000 or 600,000 years. And the last time carbon levels were so high, the oceans were 20 feet high. We have signed international commitments and pat ourselves on the back that we've done so, that seek to restrict global warming to 1.5 degrees since pre-industrial levels. This year, 2020, you were mentioning records, is the hottest year on record. You see, this year we are at 1.1 degree of warming and are going to shatter, not pass, shatter the 1.5 degree this decade, and most likely be entering somewhere close to 3 degrees of global warming by 2050. By 3 degrees of global warming in the next 30 years, there is no ecosystem on Earth, plants, flora, fauna, that can adapt to such rapid change. Agriculture will come to an end. As it is, coral reefs are down, oceans are heating up. We're seeing forest fires in the Amazon in Australia. We see temperatures in the Arctic over 100 degrees. And this is excluding greenhouse gas emissions coming from the Arctic, where the tundra is melting. We are facing a global climate event where human civilization is threatened. So I don't think we have the luxury of balancing anything, when in the last 150 years, only a handful of industries have made ridiculous amounts of money polluting us, polluting our air, polluting our water, killing us without justification. There is no balance here.
Another question. I'll take another question from the audience. Are there any examples of sustainable or green industry on the small or large scale in Pakistan currently?
Yes,
go on.
Because of the energy crisis between 2008 and 13, the Pakistani textile sector responded by introducing energy efficiency in all of its systems. Right now, they're actually investing in having a special, it's like a think tank that will provide know-how to small and medium industries so that they can also be energy efficient. It's remarkable.
And of course, what Pakistan has been doing on the wind energy, on the solar energy front, I think that's important too. I find it interesting that a country like the UK, which has had used coal for hundreds and hundreds of years and has way better coal than we have, has actually made that shift and is producing more energy, particularly in the summers, from renewable sources than from coal, oil, fossil fuel sources. So I actually think it's perfectly possible. So that's one. The other thing is also, I think, on the energy efficiency front, Rafay talked about the textiles, but I actually think there's so much to be done, particularly with building efficiency, housing, energy efficiency. So there are lots of um, industries, small and large, that have the potential to grow. I think the tech sector also, I find Pakistanis are pretty amazing actually on the tech front, and how they can harness that in order to tackle some of these pollution issues that we have, to shift things in a more sustainable direction. I would love to see um, particularly small entrepreneurial type industry grow on that front, because I think there's a lot of potential there.
And on individual scale, I would give some examples of textile industries, particularly in Karachi and Faisalabad and Punjab, who are practicing uh, zero discharge. They have installed treatment plants, not only to comply the environmental quality standards, but they are also doing the tertiary treatments to reuse that water, keeping in mind that the water won't be available in future for the industries. So they have already implemented so many good initiatives like zero liquid discharge, zero discharge hazardous chemicals. So there are so many initiatives taken by the industries on small scale and few large industrial scale. Those are very good examples for others to follow.
Okay, I'll take another question from the audience. While we have the laws in place, how do we ensure worldwide public awareness? Our general public is mostly seen to be very unaware of, say, public littering. Do we have a fine system in place for public littering? We don't see the government being very proactive about this.
Well, I've had the great pleasure of serving on the board and as chairman of the Lahore Waste Management Company, which collects just under 6,000 tons of waste a day. And surprisingly, nobody in Lahore pays for it. So Lahoris get to have their trash picked up for free. And, as chairman, I used to say it's a thankless lot. Koi thank you bhi nahi karta. But we did realize that there is actually no municipal law for littering. And there wasn't a municipal law for having illegal landfills as well. So in about 2015-16, when they were redrafting the Local Government Act, those offences were introduced, and you can lose as much as 500 rupees should you be caught littering. And how dare you?
That's very interesting. I didn't know this. I didn't know that there was a fine as well. Okay, another question. This is interesting. Is the Prime Minister's Plant a Tree campaign? Prime Minister's Plant a Tree campaign a good idea? Is it viable? Quite understand this. Let's take another. I'll just read out another. This is a bit confusing. The developments in the new government and talks on electric vehicle policy and all, do you see any hope with regards to that? Saqib, would you like to comment on this? Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. First, I would like to reply on the question. While we have the laws in place, how do we ensure worldwide public awareness? If I see my city, Karachi, I don't give blame to the people, because we don't have any system in place anywhere in Sindh. We don't have any landfill site. We don't have any solid waste collection system in place in Karachi or anywhere in Karachi, including the hazardous waste. The hazardous waste is being burned. It is being dumped all over the places. We have dumping sites where the industrial waste, the most hazardous waste, is being dumped with the municipal waste. We don't have any littering fine system in place here. So if the system does not exist, why should we blame the public? The public is doing, whatever the NGOs and the CBOs working here. in different parts of Karachi and Sindh, they are doing on their own. They're doing their best job, but the government is not providing any facility. So in the absence of any infrastructure, I won't say that the public is not the public is responsible. No, the public is very much aware now. They are very much aware, and during this COVID-19, I see people behaving in a responsible manner. But again, the government has not provided anything during this COVID-19. We don't have any incineration plants working in the city. We don't have any landfill site in the city, and I don't see any plan for Karachi in the current budget.
It's interesting that you brought up COVID-19. I actually noticed this, and I have a question regarding that as well. That even though we're under lockdown, and I've noticed that the sky is clearer, so there's less air pollution, but I see a different form of waste, different kind of waste on the streets now. And now there will be masks and gloves on the street, everywhere. So I don't agree with the fact that we're being careful, because I feel that we're just not coming out on the streets, and when we are coming out on the streets, we are littering whatever we have. So if there are gloves, we throw them on the street. If we have masks, we throw them on the street. And so my question is, looking at the recent picture, how have the dynamics of waste production and management changed during the COVID-19 outbreak? Saqib, what do you think with regards to waste production and management?
Among the many adverse consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic is the sudden surge in the volume of plastic waste, particularly for the products used for personal protection and healthcare purposes. And the disaster waste management, the current disaster waste management planning is mainly focused on the debris like earthquake waste. So optimization and decision-making tools are needed to support waste management planning, treatment approaches, infrastructure, capacity, the systems, treatment, collection, design, logistics, safety, regulatory aspects linked to the biodisaster response. So we lacked in disaster management. So there's a much need to implement a disaster management waste management plan for in the whole country.
So you're saying we need a systematic approach.
Yeah.
Rafay, you're muted. Are you going to say something?
I think that's
yes.
Okay, I think that's important. All the infrastructure that Saqib talks about, but I think it's also important that we have some sort of behavior change on the part of people, and I actually think education is particularly learning this at a young age, that you don't litter, that you don't throw things out, that you don't spit on the street, that you don't. I think that's as important, and I think that you need both. You need a system, but you also need people to be aware and to change behavior.
I think that if we, I'm just adding a point, that if we introduce this in our values, this is not a value in Pakistan. I haven't seen this as one of the values that you are taught in a family system, with regards to where parents are telling their children that when you go outside, don't throw this on the road. It's more likely if you go in different areas in Karachi, like I'm just going to talk about Karachi right now, there will be people who will throw bags of litter from their balconies, and it's a very common practice. And then there will be people who will, very educated as well, they'll be in their cars and they will throw cans outside the cars. So I feel that, do you agree that if we sort of add this to our values, then it might bring a behavioral change?
Can I say that before we get off saying Pakistanis are horrible and don't have any civic sense, can I just say that waste management is a very complicated issue and it's very easy to generalize it. You see, Lahore has, for example, a square footage of about 1,700 square kilometers and about 10 million people who live and dispose of their waste in it. In order to, I mean, for this you need, and Lahore has close to 1,000 trucks. and at least 13,000 people who work 2 shifts a day to pick that trash up. Karachi, with its over 20 million people and a half a dozen different civic agencies operating, makes it next to impossible to provide an institutional or governance structure to provide service delivery in this way. But that said, you can't conflate Lahore and Karachi's, which are governance issues, with what people's desires and ambitions are. If you don't have good waste management, you still have to get rid of your trash. And if there's no place for it to go, it'll go over the wall. Okay, so unless there's a system and governance in place, it really won't work there. And you have to understand that waste changes from city to city. Lahore, as I said, produces close to 6,000 tons of trash. But if you take all the other major urban areas in Punjab, Faisalabad, Sialkot, Rawalpindi, what have you, they won't produce 3,500 tons put together. So the waste management problems, the infrastructure governance problems you face in Karachi and in Lahore shouldn't be compared to the waste management challenges and problems you have in smaller cities of, say, 500,000 people, where if you give me maybe 50 or 60 trucks and 300 people, I'll be able to pick your trash up. So I think just addressing and sort of saying, we need to have value. I think all Pakistanis know that environmental pollution is bad. No Pakistani wants dirty water. No Pakistani wants to pollute. But you're up against a system over here. And just by way of drawing a comparison, I am a climate activist and an environmentalist, right? I don't want to see, for example, the energy in my country being produced from fossil fuels or coal or thermal, for example. But the electricity I'm enjoying right now in my house comes from an energy mix where fossil fuels are a substantial part. So my individual action or my individual mentality or my individual empathy towards the cause means nothing if the infrastructure upon which I'm enjoying things is skewed and is environmentally unfriendly and is bad governance and is a climate challenge. You see, so we have to address the systemic problems to the issue as well.
So we have a question from the audience. If the burning of trash is stopped, what is an eco-friendly alternative?
Compost.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Compost banao.
Most
trash of middle class homes in Pakistan is food waste. Uska compost banao. Compost से जो मीथेन बनती है, उससे आप घरों के अंदर गैस प्रोवाइड करें या बिजली बनाएं.
Yes, I also agree. I also agree with Rafay, because there's a system called integrated waste management, and now already in Islamabad, Rafay must know that there's a integrated resource recovery center has been established in Islamabad on the lines of integrated resource recovery with the help of UN Habitat. What is that integrated resource recovery? Most of the waste, जो आप देखें, आपकी waste की composition देखें, तो most of the waste is organic waste. 65% is organic waste. That is producible, compostable. तो उसका compost बनाएं. Why do you burn this waste? It should be converted into a compost. और उसके अलावा जो आपके precious items हैं, that is another big industry, जिसमें we can have recycling industry, जहाँ पे ये बहुत सारा waste जो कि हमारा source पे जाने से पहले वो हो जाता है. अगर government इस पे properly policy लेकर आए on the integrated waste management, तो आपका ये waste management will not be an issue on the lines of public private partnership, PPP. It's a very good model. पब्लिक प्राइवेट पार्टनरशिप मॉडल के ऊपर आप वेस्ट मैनेजमेंट सिस्टम को इम्प्लीमेंट करें. जो आपका ऑर्गेनिक वेस्ट है उसको कैसे करना है, जो आपका हैजर्डस वेस्ट है, नॉन हैजर्डस वेस्ट है, रिसाइक्लेबल वेस्ट है, all that waste can be managed, and we can provide number of jobs, can create jobs in Pakistan.
What about plastic waste? What can Pakistan do to reduce plastic waste? Sakib, hello.
प्लास्टिक वेस्ट के हवाले से वी ऑल नो कि एक पॉलिसी गवर्नमेंट ने अभी आज से कुछ अर्से पहले दी थी. उसका लीगल एस्पेक्ट राफिज साहब बेहतर बता सकते हैं. देयर इज अ बैन ऑन प्लास्टिक. सिंध गवर्नमेंट ने ऑलरेडी इस पे बैन लगा दिया है. ऑन सिंगल यूज प्लास्टिक के हवाले से, और लेकिन उसकी इम्प्लीमेंटेशन अभी इट्स अ चैलेंज नाउ, और खास तौर पे ड्यूरिंग दिस COVID-19 व्हेन वी सी लॉट ऑफ प्लास्टिक यूज, so the implementation has become a challenge. So but I would support the government कि जो सिंगल यूज प्लास्टिक पे उन्होंने इस वक्त बैन लगाया है, तो इस पे बहुत अच्छा ये एक होगा कि अगर इसको प्रॉपर्ली इम्प्लीमेंट किया जाए, और एज अ पब्लिक एंड अदर इंस्टीट्यूशंस जो हमारे यहाँ पे हमारे एक पॉलिसी और भी आई थी और रेगुलेशन आई थी रिगार्डिंग दी ऑक्सो बायोडिग्रेडेबल प्लास्टिक के हवाले से. So I see lot of industries using biodegradable plastics now, oxo biodegradable plastics now. So there is I see an opportunity in कि इस पे अगर properly implementation हो तो we can save the environment.
Okay, so I have a follow-up question. So this is with regards to plastic that we will now be using. What about the plastic that's already been used? For instance, bottles or whatever we use, the plastic that's already there on the planet. What do we do about that?
Recycle it.
But there's so much. All of it can be recycled?
Yes.
No, stop using plastic.
I read an interesting article. I think it was somewhere in Africa where they took large bottles of plastic. I think there were about 400 to 500 bottles to make boats, and the fishermen were basically using these boats to go and fish, and they were saving money because they didn't have to buy a boat, a wooden boat. They didn't have to build the boat also, and they were saving money through this. So I think it was very interesting. Okay, so Dr. Kulsoom, would you like to comment, or should I ask another question?
No, please go ahead with another question. I think they're good answers. I'm enjoying also listening to the other panelists.
Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to know how does pollution impact climate change? Dr. Kulsoom, would you like to comment?
Yes, I can comment on that. Pollution, well, there's different types of pollution, right? Pollution, when we talk about pollution, it's such a general term, and you're basically introducing things into the environment that have not actually been there before. And if you introduce them to such an extent that you actually create adverse effects in the environment or on humans, then we term that pollution. Now, particularly what we're finding with things like fossil fuel use, etc., you get lots of different pollutants when you burn, let's say, coal or petrol. When you burn petrol, you get carbon dioxide, which is basically a greenhouse gas. So we actually are warming the atmosphere. And by warming the atmosphere, as I think Rafay talked about earlier, there are all sorts of things happening with that increase in temperature. We're getting melting of glaciers, we're getting flooding at the wrong time. I always tell people don't realize what an amazing thing snow is. Snow or ice is essentially nature's way of preserving water so that in winter it's snow, but in summer, in the growing season, it comes down as water. If we don't have that happen and it comes down too early, you get the floods. And then you get droughts in summer when you actually need the water. So all of this is affecting crops, is affecting sea level rise, and so on. So you've got that happening, but yet there are other things when you burn fuels, like you have tiny little particulates. We call them particulate matter that's less than 2.5 microns in size. They make their way to your lungs. And these affect health. They warm the atmosphere also, actually. Some of these particles warm the atmosphere, so the greenhouse gases, but also they affect health of people because they go into your lungs and they lodge in the deepest part of your lungs and can even make it through your blood bloodstream. And essentially, what people don't realize, people often think of, oh, I'm coughing, or I have a cold, or respiratory illnesses, I have asthma because of air quality. But actually, the biggest cause of mortality of people dying from air quality are actually strokes and lung cancer. And most people don't think, oh, I've had a stroke, it's because of the air quality. They think, oh, I have heart disease, I have this, I have that. But that could be due to air quality. So there are pollutants which are both warming the air as well as making people sick. And I like to think that you may be warming the air, but ultimately you are making people sick by the floods, the droughts, the heat waves. So you are actually causing people to fall ill or die or have uh, other types of economic damage as a result of climate change. So there's pollution where you may be directly affecting health, but climate change in a way is also getting there, directly affecting human beings and the human race, as I think Rafi pointed out very nicely earlier on.
Saqib and Rafi, would you
Yes.
like to comment?
Yes.
See, climate change as the unexpected and unprecedented changes in normal and well-established weather patterns that are now taking place on account of what we call greenhouse gas emissions. And these are certain types of some fossil fuel-based, some non-fossil fuel-based emissions. For instance, the growing of rice, because you submerge the organic matter underwater, produces methane, which is a greenhouse gas. So it's not necessarily linked to industry, but certainly industry and transportation and the coal and petroleum products that they use are for fossil fuels that further exacerbate the greenhouse gases and the emissions in the atmosphere. Environmental pollution is what we do locally. Environmental pollution is something as local as not disposing of your trash properly, or polluting the water, or indeed polluting the air. But that should be very different. When I speak about climate change and the climate crisis, I'm speaking specifically of those actions which result in greenhouse gas emissions increasing in the atmosphere, and then the unprecedented weather changes we're experiencing as a result. The things such as plastic pollution or single-use plastic or water pollution, for example, are issues that I would classify very much as environmental issues. And the two, although seem linked, should be treated very separately.
Saqib, were you going to say something?
Yes. It has a very, climate change is also making, impact on our water resources, water cycle, the hydrology, and ultimately affects the quality of water that we take. It's making heavy, intense downpours, droughts, rising water temperatures. These are very common now, and this can alter the quality of our drinking water and recreational water. The bacteria, the viruses thrive in these conditions, and when they come into contact with humans can cause numerous illnesses. Lack of water can also impact human health, which is because of the climate change. We don't have water. We have lack of water that can impact human health, especially in drought conditions. Contamination of drinking water by bacteria, viruses can trigger outbreaks of illnesses such as diarrhea. And the drought also reduces the Earth's ability to absorb water. So when there's a precipitation falls as more intense storms or as hurricanes, that can cause flooding and can affect the water quality. In rural areas, water runoff picks up animal waste, pesticides, and fertilizers. So you see the link between the climate change and the pollution, that because of the runoffs, the water picks up animal waste, pesticides, fertilizers, and the water and as we see that the drought condition, as the water sources declines, the concentration of the contaminants increases, making them more likely to affect the human health.
I think there's one other thing that I'd like to come in on. I mean, we're seeing with COVID-19, that it's a global pandemic. Every country is affected. And in a way, one only solves it if you can wipe it out in every single country in the world. So it's something that really requires, even though there's response happening within countries, it's something that really does eventually require a global response in order to tackle it. Climate change is exactly like that. It's a global phenomena. So, it requires kind of everybody across the globe to do the right thing in order to get us back to a point, or to help us um, um, where the earth isn't continuing to warm. I think there is what we call adaptation, where you have to actually adapt to what is happening, and that it tends to be just because we organize by national governments, tends to be a national approach, and the responses to that it's not just disaster response. It's also looking, not just waiting for the disaster, but in a way also looking forward as to what you can do in order to better manage the impacts of climate going forward. So there's something about doing something to reduce the impacts, but also how to manage them. So it is indeed, I agree with Rafay that it's the two should not be mixed up. To me, climate is a much bigger issue in one sense, because it covers every sector. It's not just and even environment covers every sector, but I think it covers things where even you may not think, oh, this has anything to do with environment.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to take one question from the audience. The healthcare industry requires mass production of medicines and medical equipment. How does the production of these items affect the environment?
Well, we produce a fair amount of, the amount of hospital waste produced in large cities, which are where most of the hospitals are a fraction of the overall waste produced. So I think if I recall correctly, Lahore, which produces close to 6,000 tons a day, produces something close to 40 tons of hospital waste. Now, these sorts of hospital waste can be categorized as hazardous or non-hazardous. Because you have, for example, when undoing a simple bottle or a jar might go through some cardboard packaging, which isn't a problem at all. But many hospital wastes come through hospital procedures, especially medical procedures, and might be contaminated with human bacteria, in some case radioactive elements or other chemicals, for example. And it's very important that that type of waste be properly separated and dealt with. Now, the legal system we have, even though environment is a provincial issue, at the provincial level, requires hospitals to segregate their waste into what is hazardous and non-hazardous. And this should be their obligation, because remember, they are making money for treating your health, and part of those profits should go responsibly into the segregation of waste. Now, the hazardous waste can be disposed of in the municipal landfill or through recycling, but the hazardous substances have to be dealt with in a proper and professional manner. Now, this can normally include incineration or something called autoclaving, both of which are actually quite expensive. And really, other than Lahore and Karachi and Islamabad, there aren't any cities in Lahore that produce enough hospital waste on their own to generate an economically feasible hospital waste treatment plant. So what we have to think of going forward is collecting hospital waste in some sort of centralized area, paying for the transport costs of getting that waste from hospitals and cities to this remote location, and then treating it in a way that can be sustainable and helpful to the environment.
Do we have any such plants currently? Do we?
Yes, we do.
No?
But
We do? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I can't hear you, Rafa. Hello? Saki, would you like to comment?
Yes, if I talk about Karachi, so according to the KMC's municipal department, there are over 5,000 medical facilities working in the city limits. And this includes 20 secondary and tertiary care hospitals, but only 2% do have their own medical waste disposal system, but none of them fully comply with WHO requirements. For example, the Jinnah JPMC, the Jinnah Postgraduate Medical Center, has its own incinerator to burn medical waste, but lacks implementation of the WHO guidelines. Like by civil hospitals, Abbasi Shahid Hospital do not have any incineration site or proper system in place to segregate the infectious and non-infectious waste. So it is a fact that 85% of the total waste generated from the healthcare units, it comprises of non-hazardous waste. 15% remains as hazardous waste that may be infectious, toxic, or radioactive, because it includes injections, swabs, bandages, disposable medical devices, and other syringes, needles, disposable blades, expired materials. And according to WHO, the average medical waste per patient on the basis is 2 kg on the daily basis, 2 kg, and the KMC collects waste from 400 registered medical facilities, which is incinerated at a plant in near Meva Shah, which is currently malfunctioning. It is only treating 30% of the waste, and the rest is being burned open on the landfills, on the dumping sites, and the areas near residential areas, causing environmental pollution, air pollution. So we don't have any medical hazardous waste management system in place anywhere in Karachi. The system which is present under the KMC is malfunctioning.
If I understood the question correctly, I think they were talking about the healthcare industry. And I think this is just like any other industry um, producing anything as to whether they affect the environment or not. It actually just depends on whether there are environmental standards in place preventing that pollution, and whether those industries are following those standards and are ensuring that those standards are being complied with, and if they are, then that's fine. I mean, especially if those standards have been set in a way not to pollute the environment. And by this I'm talking about the actual pharmaceutical companies, the healthcare industry. I think my other two panelists have really discussed very well the hospital waste situation.
I agree with Dr. Kulsum. If we talk about the healthcare industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and if I compare it with other sectors, I think it is polluting less as compared to the pharmaceutical, to the textile industry or the chemical industries, because the issue of wastewater, if we talk about the wastewater disposal system or the wastewater issue, it is less severe in the pharmaceutical industry as compared to the other industries. And most of the industries, when I see in Karachi, they are complying with the environmental quality standards for air pollution and water, wastewater.
Okay, thank you. Just one last question. So, as individuals, what practices do you think we should adopt to save the environment? I can't hear you. I think you're muted.
Address the system, which is capitalism, patriarchy, consumerism, and the fossil fuel-based industry. Individual efforts like turning the tap off are nothing compared to the scale of the challenges ahead. But that said, if you're serious about these sorts of things, may I propose you stop eating meat? May I propose you not use coal for any of your cooking, and that means taking tikkas off the plate? May I also propose not using your private car and traveling?
Thank you. Dr. Kulsum?
I think citizens should be both doing the right thing, but also expecting more as to what how their country can be different. You know, that you can have clean air, that you can have um, less pollution. For me, development isn't just, as others have pointed out, isn't just, oh, there are more jobs. Development, if you look at what, when we go anywhere, when we consider development, it's actually a clean environment as well, and a healthy environment, as well as having jobs and so forth. So I would love to see Pakistani citizens be conscious that they have to do something about it, but also demand more from their government and from the system, and do everything they can to put that system in place. Because if they do that, then they'll achieve it. It's whatever you want, you get, and you have to want it, and you have to want it enough and demand it.
Thank you. Saki, would you like to comment? Anything to add?
Yes, I think we have to regulate ourselves first. हमें सबसे पहले अपने आप को बदलना होगा. We have to learn to live within our means. जितनी चादर है ना, उतने ही पाँव फैलाने होंगे. Otherwise, इस वक्त हम जिस सिचुएशन पे जो को देख रहे हैं, फेस कर रहे हैं, इसने हमें बहुत कुछ सिखाया है ड्यूरिंग दिस कोविड-19. ये जो हम कर रहे हैं इस वक्त, जो आप ये हमारे साथ एक मीटिंग कर रही हैं, शायद अगर ये लॉकडाउन ना होता तो हम बहुत सा अपना अपनी अपनी गाड़ियों में बैठ के जो है वो एक प्लेस पे आ रहे होते, और वहाँ पे हम सब बैठ के इसको मीटिंग कर रहे होते. सो वी हैव व्हाट वी हैव लर्नड दैट वी कैन स्टिल मीट, डिस्कस दीज थिंग्स व्हाइल वर्किंग फ्रॉम होम. क्या मुझे जरूरत है कि मैं इतने सारे रिसोर्सेस को बर्बाद करके और अपना कार्बन फुटप्रिंट बढ़ा के जो है ये सब करूं, इतने सारी मुसीबतों को पालूं. तो जितनी चादर है उतने पांव हम फैलाएं, और अल्लाह ताला की जो नेमतें हैं उनका हम शुक्र अदा करें हर तरह से. ये क्योंकि ये एक ही प्लेनेट है, एक ही जमीन है जो अल्लाह ताला ने हमें दी है. तो मेरा ख्याल है कि we have to regulate ourselves, one, and we have to learn to live within our means. This is the solution.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we have run out of time, but thank you so much for being a part of the session. I thoroughly enjoyed it and I did learn a lot. Nabiha, would you like to say something?
Yeah, can I just request all the participants to fill out a short feedback form about your experience? It'll just help us learn from our mistakes. Thank you to all the panelists. I thought this was a very necessary discussion and I certainly learned a lot. And thank you to the Dawood Foundation for helping us set this up. And yeah, have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum.